Hey everyone, thank you so much for being here. Before we kick off this week's episode, just a quick ask. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell to make sure that you never miss an episode, never miss out on any of the strategies and tactics that we're sharing to help you continue charting your own path to freedom. And if you'd like to go deeper with any of this, we've launched a free Facebook group, which you can join at pathtofreedom.com/group. And we've linked that in the show notes to make it easy for you to find. All right. Thank you again for being here. Let's drop in to the episode.
Joining me today on the show is Wes Barefoot. Wes comes with an abundance of knowledge in franchising. He is an entrepreneur expert and has launched multiple franchises. Wes, welcome to the show. I'm so grateful to have you here.
Leah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, my pleasure, my pleasure. Tell us a little bit about what got you to this point. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, sure. So as you kind of mentioned, my expertise is franchise ownership, and my wife and I are franchise owners ourselves. We've built and sold franchise businesses, and then a lot of where I spend my working time today is in a consulting business where I help other people explore franchise ownership and determine if that's an avenue that could be a good fit for them. And so kind of fell backwards into this whole world of franchising. I, went to business school in college. I don't think the word franchise was ever mentioned in business school.
Yeah.
So it wasn't something on my radar. In my mind at the time, franchising was fast food restaurants and sub shops. So never imagined that, that's kind of the direction life would take me in. But a few years out of college, I met the founders of a company that had recently started franchising their business. And I'd been working for a big, kind of Fortune 500 type company for about 3 years out of college. And, just kind of quickly figured out that didn't really feel like what I wanted to do for the next, 20 to 30 years of my life. And so was starting to put some feelers out, met these guys that had started this business, and now they're franchising it. And it wasn't a food business, which was kind of the first thing that caught my attention, but it just had, more of an entrepreneurial, startup kind of feel to it. And it seemed exciting. So went to work for them and, help them grow that brand over the course of 4.5 years or so. And that just opened doors. I went and worked for a couple of other national franchise companies. And that's really what eventually set my wife and I off on the path of buying franchise businesses ourselves, and getting to a point where we own businesses instead of working for other people.
Yeah, that's amazing. That gives you a lot of freedom when you're able to do that. What was the what was the catalyst that made you feel like you wanted to turn around and make this into a consulting business so that you could teach others? What drove you to that point?
Yeah, I like that question a lot. It was a number of things. When I was working for franchise companies, a lot of what I was doing was franchise sales and development. So, I was working with people that were interested in possibly investing in the franchise company that I represented. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of due diligence that needs to be done, for anyone that's considering investing money into any sort of a business venture. And so I kind of, worked with these people, took them through the due diligence process, made sure that they could get all of the answers to their questions and all the information that they needed to make a good educated decision. But, it was fairly common that as I would get to know someone, and, this process takes place over the course of, weeks, if not months, and you get to know these people a little bit and you start to build, a bit of a relationship with them. But it wasn't uncommon that, for one reason or another, the brand I represented was just not the right fit for the people that I was working with. And so that was kind of the end of the road in terms of my ability to help them. um at some point in there, my wife and I bought our first franchise, which happened after my wife got laid off from her corporate job. So she was really the one kind of in the day to day of that franchise business, which meant I kept my corporate job selling franchises.
Yeah.
over the course of 2 years, we were making enough business in our franchise, enough money in our franchise business to where, I could leave my W-2 job and, salary, commission, benefits, all of that. And it was having this tremendous impact on our life. We'd had our first kid at that point. So, the time freedom component of it became a lot more important to us than it was before kids. And so I
Absolutely.
just, this positive impact that business ownership had for us, and for us it was business ownership through a franchise. I wanted to help other people just understand, how franchising works. I think a lot of people, they don't fully understand everything that franchising entails. They think it's fast food restaurants, and that's about it. And there's so many other types of franchise businesses out there, and I think most people are looking for ways that they can take more control of their time and their livelihood. And business ownership can be a great way to do that, and a franchise can be a great way to get into business ownership.
Yeah. Franchises really helps to they already have the structure in place. So
Yep.
really, it's nice to kind of buy into something that's already structured versus buying something and you have to be the one that creates that structure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me a little bit more about what other types of franchises, because someone listening to this, I know they're just thinking McDonald's and Burger
Yeah.
King right now.
Yeah, yeah. It's
So
and it's
let's
common.
share some. Yeah, let's share some other types of franchises that are out there that are possible for somebody to be a part of or invest in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's super common that people just kind of think of food businesses. And like, just to kind of give some context, at any given time there's usually around 4,000 different franchise opportunities across the US, and about half of those are food. So obviously there are a ton of different food franchise concepts, but outside of that you've got several thousand other non-food franchise opportunities. And it's really all over the board. You've got everything from, health, wellness, fitness, recovery type franchises. You've got franchises in, senior care, childhood education, childhood enrichment. A lot of franchises in different service categories where you're not even operating out of a storefront or a brick and mortar location. So
Mhm.
you've got franchises in home services, home improvement. Those are actually the types of franchises that my wife and I own and have owned. Um, Automotive, retail, B2B services. I mean, the list kind of goes on and on, but it's always a lot of fun for me as I'm working with people and they start to understand the full landscape of franchising. I'll talk to them every couple of weeks, and they usually comment just how much they notice when they're out and about during their normal daily activities, how many of the businesses they drive past and how many of the businesses they actually are customers of are in fact franchises.
That's amazing. You know what's interesting? It's like when you open up your awareness to something, all of a sudden you see it everywhere.
Yeah,
Which is
100%.
which is what made me excited to have you on the show because I haven't really like opened up personally. When I chatted with you a little bit earlier, I was like, I haven't opened up my awareness to franchises.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty awesome being able to look at a different way of earning money and then eventually having it be a source of potential passive income, something that requires very little time. So at the maximum, how much time do you think you dedicate to your franchises?
Yeah, so it's going to vary depending on a number of things, the type of business that you own, and then really a lot of it depends on the individual owner and their skill set, right? I mean, in theory, any business can be started, at least in kind of a semi-passive or a semi-absentee manner,
Yeah.
because you hire a manager and you delegate the day-to-day management of that business to the manager. And a lot of franchises are structured that way, or at least market themselves that way. The reality of it, though, is that, at least in my experience, some businesses are much better suited to that semi-passive startup approach.
Mhm.
Whereas other franchises, realistically, the owner probably needs to be involved in a full-time capacity in the business for at least the first year, year and a half, so that they can, lay a good foundation, and then they start, building out a management team underneath them, and delegating more and more of the daily operations so that they can kind of step back. So, one thing I'm always very, very clear, when I'm talking about franchising to people, is it's not a passive investment. It's not, hey, I've got an extra $100,000 that I want to put to work. Let me put it in the stock market and see what type of a return I can get on that, or let me go invest in some real estate. It's never going to be entirely passive. You can safely assume that the the business owner's time input is going to be more in the beginning,
Yeah.
as you're getting things set up, getting established. And so that's where I kind of come back to, you see people all the time that have uh, really kind of built their franchise businesses into almost entirely passive income, but they've probably done that over the course of, several years. And those are also people that are probably very, very skilled when it comes to, building, leading, and managing teams. So the person that's, you know, not as well versed when it comes to, how to hire, how to train, how to manage, how to inspire people on their team, they may not be as likely to get their franchise business to the point where it's that passive. So, and that's a lot of what, I talk about, and kind of coach the people that I work with, because with all these different types of franchise businesses out there, the role of the owner can look very, very different. And a lot of people choose the franchise that they want to invest in based on whatever the product or the service is of that business. And they don't really spend enough time investigating, okay, if I own this business, what is my day to day going to look like? And what are the types of activities that me as the owner are going to be spending most of my time on? And are those things that I enjoy? Are those things that really play to my strengths and my skill sets? Is this going to mesh with the type of lifestyle that I'm looking for? So those are the things that we really drill into as we kind of work through my consulting process. And that's what ultimately allows me, to match people up with the right type of franchise for them based on a whole host of factors, but including, their role as the owner, and does it really, play to their strengths and their interests.
Sure, sure. If there was an ideal avatar, who would be that ideal avatar for this for franchising?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, part of what I love about what I do is that there's not just one avatar. There are a number of avatars. And if we kind of go back to the diversity of all the different types of franchise businesses that are out there, there's a lot of different people that, whether they realize it or not, are probably very good candidates for franchise ownership. And there's probably, franchise businesses out there that are a really good fit for them. So, I've worked with a lot of people that are, kind of veterans of corporate America, if you will. They've spent 15, 20 years, working in some capacity in corporate America. And, a lot of times they've thought off and on about starting their own business. I do end up working with people sometimes that are in transition. Their company did a restructuring, or their position was eliminated. And so now they're kind of using this transition as a catalyst to really explore business ownership. I do work with, people that are looking at a franchise as an investment and not a full pivot, meaning, they've got a corporate career and they plan to, continue in that corporate career, and start a franchise business on the side, you know, generate a second income stream. And a lot of times those people are thinking a little further ahead. They're kind of laying the groundwork to, be able to leave corporate America on their terms. If they can have a business that's already generating good revenue and income, then that makes it easier to walk away from a good paying job, if that's something that they decide they won't. I've worked with a lot of, you know, women and men that have been staying at home with their kids. And now that their kids are getting a little bit older, they're ready to, go back into some sort of producing income for the household. But they don't want to go take a 9 to 5 or a 40 or 50 hour a week job. And so, the right type of franchise can be a really good fit. And I work with some very high level, high net worth people that are looking for more of that kind of passive investment because they have the resources and they have the skill set and the ability to put a high performing management team in place from day one. Um, I've worked with people as young as 22, 23 years old that just kind of realized they don't want to go work for someone else, and if they have a friend or a family member that's willing to invest or co-sign on an SBA loan with them, they're getting into business for themselves at very very young ages comparatively speaking. So there's not many people out there that I wouldn't be in a position to at least um, help them understand the landscape of franchising, and it's very likely that we'd find some options that were really interesting for them.
Sure, that's pretty exciting. We're getting ready to take our first break here. And as soon as we get back, I'm going to pick your brain for some more information here. I want to learn more about the loans. I want to learn more about the investment parts of the structure. And we'll we'll learn a little bit more when we get back.
Sounds good.
All right, great job, all clear. Just gonna save the segment real quick.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Wes.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, counting down in 4, 3, 2.
Welcome back to the Success Frequency. I'm here chatting with Wes Barefoot, and we are chatting about franchises. And Wes shared a ton of knowledge on who's the best candidate for this. Now, I want to learn a little bit more about how do you obtain money? How do you get loans? What type of loans work ideal? Share with us what your insights have been. Let's say it's somebody looking to start their small business, their franchise. What is out there that they need to know?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this topic up because I found it's the number one question that keeps most people from taking any real action in terms of really diving in and doing some research on
Sure.
franchise opportunities. I think a lot of people, and kind of what we talked about in the first segment, most people when they think of franchising, they think of restaurants and food, and then they associate that with being a very large investment, which is the case. Most of these fast food restaurant chains out there are going to require a seven-figure plus investment, just to get
Sure.
the business up and running. So I think a lot of people just kind of naturally assume that they're not in a financial position to do something like invest in a franchise. And so, the way we talked in the last segment about how many different types of franchise businesses are out there, and when we talk about types, we're not just talking about different industries. There's so many different business models within franchising, and so there are absolutely franchises that require far far less initial capital than something like a traditional restaurant concept would. So, for those listening, just to give kind of some numbers as ballpark ranges, I mean, the lowest cost franchises are going to require somewhere between 80 to $150,000 of initial starting capital, which is going to also include working capital to start covering the operating expenses of the business once you open.
Sure.
Um, and then there it kind of runs the gambit. I mean, there's everything in between that and multiple seven figures. I mean, think about hotels, convenience stores, trampoline parks, things like that, which a lot of those are franchises. Those can be eight-figure investments in some cases. So it's all over the board. But to your question about funding, and as I mentioned earlier, I've worked with some very high net worth individuals over the years, and even those folks that could have self-funded, the entire investment for a franchise, typically choose to use as much of someone else's money as they can. So when it comes to lending or loan options for franchises, the most common option that you'll see utilized is an SBA loan. And the SBA is just the Small Business Administration. And the Small Business Administration is not the one actually lending the money. They work through banks. Um, Banks prefer, if it's any sort of a business loan, banks prefer to use an SBA loan versus any other type of a loan. And the reason for that is the SBA has certain guarantees in place for these banks. In most cases, the SBA will guarantee up to about 75% of the total loan amount to the bank if the borrower were to default for some reason. And so banks see that as a more secure option. And then on top of that, banks tend to really, really like franchises to lend for as opposed to someone that just has an idea for a startup because a franchise is going to have a track record. You know, the franchising in the US is regulated by the Federal Trade Commission. So there's documentation that every single franchise company has to update, publish, and file with the FTC every single year. And the banks can look at all this documentation and see a track record. And so especially if they're seeing a track record of success, that loan for that franchise, especially when backed by the SBA, is about one of the most safe loans that a bank could do. So you see a lot of people using SBA loans, and that can be a really good option. Um, Good rule of thumb is, on an SBA loan, the borrower needs to be able to inject about 20% of the loan or of the total project amount in their own cash. All right. So
Okay.
it's a $200,000 total initial investment. The borrower looking to buy the franchise would need to come up with roughly $40,000 of their own funds, and then the bank through the loan would come up with the rest. There's other funding mechanisms out there that are very common. Some people are a little less excited about taking on debt, and they'd rather figure out ways to leverage assets that they already have accumulated. And so a very common one is tapping into retirement funds through what's called a rollover for business startups. And you'll see this as an acronym a lot of times, ROBS, ROBS, again, rollover for business startups. And this is a a program or a mechanism where if someone has retirement funds put away, they can roll over a portion of those retirement funds into a business account for the purpose of starting a new business. And when they do that, they don't incur any of the tax penalties that one usually would if they were trying to access retirement funds early. And so the people that leverage that, the way they really look at it is, hey, I've got this money invested here, in this retirement account. I don't really have access to it until I get to a certain age. I just want to reallocate some of those invested dollars into another investment. Really, they're investing in themselves, but on paper, it's legitimately, an investment into a C corporation that they're starting for their own business. And you'll see people do a combination, right? You'll see people roll over enough retirement funds through one of these ROBs to cover the cash injection on an SBA loan, so they don't have to use their cash on hand or money that they've put away in savings. I think I mentioned earlier, younger people. I've worked with a lot of great younger people that just they hadn't been working long enough to really accumulate a whole lot in terms of net worth or liquid assets, and but they had a family member or a friend or a mentor that was willing to invest in them and give them sweat equity if they can go out and build the business and make it profitable. So those are some of the more common options. I see people use home equity as a way to get some of the funding that they need. Non-retirement investment portfolios. I've seen people, you can pretty easily get a line of credit against your non-retirement investments. So I've seen people do that. And then partnerships. I work pretty regularly with two or more people that are looking to partner together and kind of combine resources and combine forces and go into business together.
Sure, sure. With the rollover, like Share a little bit more about how that can work for somebody that's, getting ready to retire or wants to start something. And what is, how do they, how do they get around the tax part on it?
Yeah, so and it is, I want to make this clear, it is a legitimate program. It's not anything shady or dodgy that, if the IRS catches on to that you're doing it, you're going to be in any sort of trouble. I mean, probably 100,000 or more of these rollovers get done every single year, and it's not just, for people investing in franchise businesses. It can be for any sort of a business venture, and it's pretty technical in terms of the actual, process. But basically, you set up a, because there are a couple of requirements in order for this, for you to access the retirement funds, do
Hmm.
the actual ROBS process, which is what avoids the tax penalties that you would usually have if you accessed those funds early. So one of the requirements is the retirement funds have to be from a previous employer. Meaning, if you're currently working for a company and all of the money that you have in retirement has come from money that you've invested while working for that company, or maybe even the company was matching part of your 401k contributions, it's not eligible. So it has to be from a previous employer. And then you do have to set up a C corporation, which is where the money gets rolled out of the 401k into the business account for this C corporation. and
Okay.
and so that's where the tax strategy comes in, because there are, similar to a 401k, there are um, tax benefits to a C corporation that have to do with deferring taxes. And so um, a CPA could probably explain the mechanisms of it a lot better
Sure.
without putting your audience to sleep. But what I can tell you is it's a great option for some people. It's, a lot of this is very personal decisions for people, right? Like, some people,
Sure.
would turn over, in their grave if they thought about touching retirement funds, right? They've just
Yeah.
of that mindset, like, that money's there for when I'm actually retired. Other people can't stand the thought of taking on debt. So, it's got to be the right strategy for you. But where I find a lot of people pleasantly surprised is they realize, hey, there's a lot of franchises out there that don't require nearly as much capital as I had initially thought. And I've actually got multiple funding options. If I do, decide that I want to do this and I find the right franchise, it's not even a matter of how am I going to fund it. I've actually got a few different options, and I get to figure out what's the best option for me. So a lot of people, like I said, are pleasantly surprised when they really take the time to, do the research, or work with someone like myself.
Yeah, there's something that you mentioned earlier about C Corp. So are all structures regarding franchises primarily C Corps?
No,
Okay.
nope. So the C corp is just the requirement if you want to use the ROBS program, to
Ah,
access some of that. And that's the C corp is part of why, you don't incur the tax penalties, because you're basically taking, tax deferred dollars that have been invested into a retirement account and moving them into an account for the purpose of starting a new business. And there's also, some component of a C corp where there's tax deferral as well. Um, you see, I would say an LLC is probably the most common entity structure that you'll see people put in place to start a new business, unless they're wanting to utilize a ROBS, in which case, they need to do a C corporation. Like my wife and I, all of our businesses were LLCs, and then, after a few years, our CPA advised that we converted two of our LLCs to an S corp, and there were some clear tax advantages to doing so. So, what I tell everyone that I coach is, get a good CPA that really understands tax strategy for small businesses. I have a couple of, great CPAs, including, the CPA that we use ourselves, that that I can refer people to. But, if you're a business owner, if you're looking to get into business for yourself, so much of the value comes from legitimate tax advantages that small business owners have. But I see a lot of people leaving a lot of that on the table because they just don't have a good CPA, and they're not getting good tax advice, and they're doing their taxes in a reactionary way instead of, you know, practicing tax strategy where you're being proactive and you're looking ahead, and you're actually strategically using the tax system to your advantage.
Absolutely. I think that's definitely something that people should, they should have conversations. I chat with business owners and entrepreneurs that are getting into business, and one of the first things I say to them is get with a tax person and
Yeah.
figure out figure out where your taxes are going to sit at and what metrics you need to measure, because that's what your tax guy is going to do for you. So
Yeah.
tell you what your metrics are that you need to measure, and then that way you are able to maximize when the year, or even as the year starting to wind down, you get an opportunity to say, okay, where are we at, what are my tax implications, and make a decision.
Yeah. Yeah,
See,
totally. I mean, if you're making that transition into business ownership, you first need to really understand, you know, you pay all your taxes at the end of the year. That's how most people do it. You can, kind of make payments along the way if you want to, but you don't want to get caught uh unprepared where, you've kind of been making all this money throughout the year, no taxes are being held out of it, and you kind of look at all of that as money that you can reinvest into the business, or, spend, or, live off of, when in reality you need to be stashing some of that away because you're going to have a tax bill at the end of the year. And look, a lot of this that I coach people on are just because my wife and I learned learned some of this the hard way as we were, figuring all of this out for ourselves. So when I say get yourself a good CPA that really knows small business ownership, I'm saying that from experience because we have one now. We didn't have one for the first couple of years, and it's a night and day difference. But yeah, there's a lot that goes into it, and like I don't want to spend my time trying to learn the tax code and the tax
yeah,
strategy. I don't want to spend my
can't
time
even wrap your
reading
brain
books.
around some of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I want to know enough to be dangerous so that I'm not like ignorant to it all. But, my time can be much better spent on other things than that. And I can, have someone that's far more of an expert than I could ever hope to be, kind of be my person that handles all of that. So don't be afraid to delegate things like that if you're a business owner.
Absolutely. All right, we're getting ready for our next break. And as soon as we get back, I'm going to ask some more questions. I'm so curious about this area.
All right.
All right. Counting down in four, three, two.
Welcome back to the Success Frequency. Still chatting here with Wes. He's sharing some great insights. We talked a little bit about franchising, loans, and taxes. Now, Wes, if somebody's listening to this and they're excited about doing this, what is the first step they need to take?
Yeah, I would say, first step is start educating yourself a little bit, and there's a number of ways you can do that. I mean, obviously the internet, YouTube, there's tons of free information and free resources out there uh regarding franchising, just like there is almost any other topic. But what I find with a lot of people is when I get connected with them, they've been doing some of that, call it surface level research on their own, and it tends to get very overwhelming very quickly. I think in the first segment I mentioned there's roughly 4,000 different franchise companies
Yeah.
out there. It can be a very daunting task just to kind of get your arms around, okay, what franchises should I be looking at? And franchising, like most things in this world, not all franchise companies are created equally. There are absolutely franchises out there I believe that nobody should be investing in. Then there are great franchise companies, but there's also such a thing as a great franchise that's a bad fit for someone. And
That
and I think I talked a little bit about, why some of that is in an earlier segment. So, there's people out there like myself that have real world experience, right? In my case, I've worked for franchise companies. I've, helped other people evaluate franchises and decide if it's a good fit for them. And then, my wife and I have been through that process with the franchise companies that we've invested in. We've also been through that process with franchises we've decided not to invest in. So, I think one of the best things someone can do is plug in with someone like myself that's done this and actually has a methodical process or kind of a template that you can start working through, and it's going to be much more manageable and far less overwhelming. My process is all about education. Hey, let's learn enough to figure out, is this franchise ownership thing something that you want to continue to invest some time in? And look, I work with plenty of people that I'm able to help them learn enough, and they realize owning a franchise is probably not right for them, or the
Sure.
timing's not right. I mean, business ownership is not for everyone, and that's perfectly fine. um Other people I work with, the more they learn, the more they kind of realize that, yeah, this could be a great direction for them. And so then we start working towards, okay, what types of franchises would be the right franchises for you. So start with there. My services are very similar to that of a real estate agent or an executive recruiter, meaning the people I work with and coach don't pay me a dime. And there's no obligation. We don't sign paperwork where, they promise me they're going to buy a franchise or any of that. But I do get paid by the franchise companies that I work with, kind of a success fee. I get paid if and when I introduce them to someone that ends up becoming a franchisee with them. So it's very similar to how an executive recruiter or a headhunter, how they have their business model structured. And so, look, it takes a time investment to work through my process and do it the right way, but um, you're really just educating yourself. And so, that's a really good starting point. Look, there's a lot of franchise consultants out there, and I would never sit here and speak poorly of any of them. I would just say, if you're considering working with a franchise consultant, it probably makes the most sense to work with someone that has actually owned and had success, in a franchise business themselves. So
Sure.
that's one tip that I would give anyone out there. And of course, I'm more than happy to speak with anyone that is curious about franchising, has some basic questions, even if it's just very, very exploratory. I've got time for anyone that is just curious and wants to learn more.
Nice, nice. Let me ask you this. What are some guaranteed, you know how when you start something new, you almost always are going to fail to a certain degree. What is the most reoccurring failure that you see amongst people as they're starting out in this process?
That's a great question. So as they're starting out in the process, or
Or even they
as they're
got their
starting out in
franchise
their
up and
business?
running, maybe scaling it,
Okay.
like where
Yeah.
where do you see those common pitfalls?
That's a great question. I'll give you one on each side of that, right? So, a common, I guess, kind of, we'll call it an ambush, right? It's not even necessarily a mistake, but a common ambush or pothole I see people get into just when we're going through kind of the exploratory and the research phase is jumping to conclusions or preconceived notions. I talk a lot to people about, the importance of keeping an open mind in terms of the different types of franchise businesses that they may be open to and willing to consider. And so, we all as humans have natural tendencies, preconceived notions about things. And so, I see a lot of times where, I may recommend a particular business to someone, and for whatever reason they just have all these preconceived notions, and they kind of rule it out without really taking the time to learn more. And if they would have, they probably would have realized that some of those preconceived notions were not entirely accurate. um, for people that are getting into business for themselves, beginning that process of building their business, you mentioned scaling. And I would say this is the hardest part for most business owners. And look, if you stop and think about it, I mean, the name of my company is Path to Freedom. uh most people, if they're exploring the idea of business ownership, there's a financial component for sure, right? Most people, you know, part of the motivation to get into business for themselves is they want to be able to earn more than they've been earning. At the very least, they want to maintain, kind of their income level and their lifestyle. But what I find with all the people that I talk to, the time freedom is just as, if not more important to most people than the financial aspect of it.
Uh-huh.
And what ends up happening sometimes, unfortunately, if people don't structure and build their business the right way, even if they're making fantastic money, making far more money than they were before, as an employee or whatever the case was, they don't get that time freedom.
Mhm.
And that can be a recipe for burnout. I know people that own their own business and they work, twice as many hours and are twice as stressed out now as they were, when they were working for someone else. And
Yeah.
even if you're making more money, you're not enjoying it and you don't have time to, reap any of the rewards of all that hard work. And so, you've got to first, you got to get really clear on your goals and like what do you actually want to get out of business ownership, and what does success look like 2, 3, 5, 10 years down the road. And once you have that goal, you need to keep your eye on it, especially in the early stages, the first couple years of building the business. you know my wife is more of the operator in our businesses, and she does a fantastic job. And the franchise that we've owned for almost 7 years now, it's very lucrative for us. It's very lifestyle friendly. We have 3 young kids. And it's that way because she's built a great team, and so that business runs for us, whether we're working today or not, or whether we're, out of town or out of the country on vacation or not. Don't get me wrong, it's not entirely passive. It still requires oversight. But, at this point, 7 years in, she's got layers in place, and, she's removed a little bit from the day-to-day nuts and bolts of the business. And that's where you're going to start to really benefit from the lifestyle component that most people are looking for. But it's hard. The hardest part of any business, finding and keeping good people. I don't care what the
Yeah,
business is.
absolutely.
It's always the hardest part. And it's
I
hard
can
to
attest to that.
yeah, right. My wife and I joke all the time. We're like, man, if it weren't for customers and employees, this business ownership thing would be pretty easy. But unfortunately, both of those things are very, very necessary to have any level of success in business. But it's also hard to give things up. Most business owners, especially if they're really grinding in the beginning and kind of have their hands on everything in the business,
Control.
it's
Yeah,
hard to give up some of that control. And that's where you got to keep your eye on the long-term goals and the vision, and make sure you're not straying too far away from that. So anyways, I know that was a long-winded answer, but that is such a common
like,
mistake that I
yeah,
see people make. And it's just, I hate seeing it because it's people getting the opposite of what they started going down that path for in the first place.
sure. When you go into this realm, do you need to have an exit strategy in place?
Yeah, that's a really good question. People think I'm crazy when I kind of start asking them about exit strategy before they've even decided if they're gonna, buy a franchise or start a business or do any of it. And so, look, do you need to have a detailed exit strategy down to the year that you want to sell it, and the dollar amount and who you're going to sell it for? Definitely not. But it absolutely helps to be thinking about exit strategy. When we talk franchises, like there's definitely some franchises that are going to have a higher likelihood of being attractive for someone else or an investor to come in and acquire than
Mhm.
others. The more the owner can be removed from the day-to-day operations, the easier it is to sell the business, is kind
Sure.
of a general rule of thumb. Um, and so, some franchises are just kind of designed where it is more of a owner involved business, and they're just not designed to scale as much. And those can be a good fit for some people, right?
Right.
And then there's others that are going to really lend themselves to, scaling at multiple levels of management in place. Um, if I've got someone that I know their one of their primary goals is, build a profitable business and over the course of 5 to 7 years, sell it. They've made some money along the way, but then they have a big windfall when they sell it. Cause that's where, in a lot of cases, real life-changing money can come from when you get
Sure.
into business ownership. It's having a successful exit. Anything with recurring revenue, anything with membership base, subscription base, um, buyers and investors tend to value those types of businesses higher because they just have a lot more predictability in terms of, what the business is generating today and the upside and what it would look like if they're able to continue to grow it. So yeah, you should absolutely be thinking about that. And look, if you're wanting to get into something that you're going to do for the next 15 to 20 years, it's probably not as important to think as much about exit strategy as it is if you're like, hey, I want to do something for the next 5, maybe 7 years, and I want to have a big play, and
Yeah.
really try to make some real money. Then yeah, like let's really talk about exit strategy because that's probably going to have an impact on the type of businesses you should be looking at.
Okay, what is your number one reward for doing this?
My number one reward for doing this, I think this is gonna sound cheesy because my company is called Path to Freedom, but you know, it's freedom. Like my wife makes fun of me all the time. She's like, you would find the one thing where all you do is sit and talk to people and like nerd out on business stuff, and you know, that's your company. So for me, it doesn't even feel like work, 95% of the time. And I've learned something over the years, when I'm working with people in this capacity, and I'm sure you see this too, Aaliyah, because you're coaching, right?
Yes.
You can't want it more than them, and you can't
Oh.
make decisions for the people that you're working with. And so that used to bother me, right? I used to, lose some sleep at night because, I see people making what in my view was the wrong decision, but that's not my place, to make those decisions for people. And so once I kind of let go of that and I just got very comfortable with, I'm going to meet people where they are. I'm not going to drag someone through this process. Like they need to want it more than I want it. Then you
Mhm.
end up, spending the vast majority of your time with the right people and it doesn't feel like work at all. And like I
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, we've got 3 young kids, so this gives me, a great income, a great lifestyle. I get to, be around with my kids. I can work as much or as little as I want to. And fortunately, we have these other businesses that we've built over the years that also give us income and lifestyle. And so, that puts me in a position where, look, if you don't decide to buy a franchise, which means I'm not going to get paid anything for the time that we've spent together, it's
Mhm.
okay. It's not gonna really change my lifestyle all that much. So it kind of, I guess removes any incentive that I might have to really try to push someone into something that they're not ready for, that's not in their best interest. And so, um, I don't know if that really answers your question, but I have a lot of fun, doing what I'm doing. And it's rewarding when you talk to someone that's now been in business for a year, 3 years, 4 years, and they're getting what they want out of
Yeah,
it,
they're
and you
thriving.
help them get there. That's cool. And look, they're I've had to learn this over the years too. Like every time I talk to someone that I've worked with and helped get into a franchise, like very rarely does the phone call go like, "Hey, Wes, everything's awesome. It's perfect. It's amazing. Like, best thing." When you're a business owner, like you're gonna have crappy days. You're gonna have ups and downs. And so, usually it's like, yeah, I'm doing pretty well. Things are going good. And then, usually I'm kind of asking about some numbers and things like that. And I hear the numbers. I'm like, you're doing more than pretty good. But like, I understand, it's when you own a business, it's never perfect. There's always more work to be done. And you tend to focus more on the things that you need to get better at.
Sure, sure. I want to thank you so much for being on the show today. I think you shared an abundance of knowledge. Path to Freedom is Wes's company. Do check that out. And any final thoughts, Wes?
No, thank you for having me. I had a lot of fun, and hopefully this piqued some people's curiosity when it comes to franchising. And I don't know if my contact information will be anywhere, but
Yes.
if it is, feel
Well,
free to reach out if you want to have a discussion and learn more. I'd love to hear from you.
sure, we'll have your stuff linked. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aaliyah.